Introducing myself. So my name is Dr. Rachael Heckenberg. I'm an associate lecturer in psychology at Trobe University on the Albury-Wodonga campus. And today I'm got this session around managing stress as a digital worker. So I believe you can ask questions as we go, and I'm going to try and monitor that as I'm talking. But if I miss a question, I'll definitely leave time at the end to answer them as well. Okay. So I thought today we'd start off obviously by talking about what workplace stress is, to give everyone a bit of a background to it. I then want to talk about the benefits and challenges to working remotely that we know of before COVID-19 hit us and everyone started working from home. I think it's important to sort of understand what we know already and how the COVID-19 pandemic has really impacted or amplified some of those challenges that we see generally from working from home. I want to touch on Zoom fatigue. I'm sure this is something that we've all experienced. So how to handle it, what it is, what causes it, and some strategies to sort of overcome it. And then I thought we'd finish up today with some interventions on how to actually cope with workplace stress. So is there stuff that you can do in your day-to-day life or more formally to help you overcome any experience of workplace stress that you might be going through? So I do want to give a little disclaimer at this point that my background is in stress and well-being generally, but my doctoral research and a lot of my research since then has been focused on mindfulness meditation interventions for stress. So because of this, I feel like my presentation leans slightly more to that focus. I did try and include some other interventions, but I'm not as familiar with them, and the mindfulness meditation literature is quite strong, so I do feel comfortable recommending it as a strategy you can try. Okay. So, and apologies as well, I didn't make this very interactive, so it is much more like me just talking at you, but hopefully it's interesting stuff. Okay, so I wanted to begin firstly by defining what stress is. So I understand it's obviously not new to any of you what it is. I'm sure you've experienced it. I am imagining because you're attending a session called Managing Stress that you have experienced stress yourself. But I think it's important to define it so that we're all sort of coming from a shared understanding. I think what happens in everyday life is we throw around psychological terms with different meanings and different connotations. So it's good to sort of define what they are. Stress, for example, gets used often as like an emotional reaction, like, oh my gosh, I'm just so stressed today. But it's also used to describe things that are stresses in our environment. So like my work is really stressful, or the restrictions are really stressful, or this is just causing me so much stress. So I think having a clear definition is helpful. So I really like this one. It's that stress is the change in a person's physical or mental state in a response to a situation that poses a challenge or threat. So the things I want to unpack out of this is that it is the emotional or sort of the reaction that we have to stress. So that can be behavioural, physical, psychological as well. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative reaction. So I think often we think about stress as a negative state of mind, but it can actually have benefits to us. So obviously the reason why we have a stress response is because it serves us in some way. So when we're first presented with something that we perceive as stressful or a stressor, we need to consider whether it's a challenge or a threat. If we think it's going to be challenging or we perceive it as a challenge, this usually provokes more positive emotions in us and a more positive reaction because we have a sense that we can cope with the challenge and overcome it. So stress is helpful in that situation because it helps energize us and motivates us to get through it. This can be seen in the workplace often, particularly in sort of care. I feel like jobs that have like a really clear reason why people start working in them. So a lot of my work was on direct care workers, and they're like healthcare workers and things like that. They work directly with clients and usually have to deal with quite difficult clients. When we interviewed them about what was stressing them out at work, none of them said their clients. And me and my research team were like, shouldn't they be like challenge, like they're stressful, aren't they? Like they're demanding, they can be hostile, like isn't that an issue? And they came back with that it's not because it's a challenge. They got into the work to work with those kinds of people, so they know that they can cope with it and they have the training to do it, and it's what they were really there for. So it's this sort of more positive, I guess, experience of stress, so it doesn't lead to those negative consequences as much. The flip side to that is these threat situations. So when we feel threatened, and this doesn't need to be physical, it could be like threat to the self or your identity or something like that. When we feel like we're threatened or hindered in some way, this usually results in a negative emotional response, and that's where we can see some development of health issues, particularly if it's a chronic thing. So this is where we tend to have like a fight or flight reaction, or just our stress hormones get activated and things like that. So if this occurs as like an acute thing, so for a really short time, again, our body's so well adapted to cope with that, we don't really see any issues. So, you know, if you're driving to work and there's a really slow person in front of you, not that we drive very much anymore, there's a really slow person in front of you, and you get really frustrated in the moment, but you're able to move on with the rest of the day and you don't really think about it, you're not going to have too many issues from that. That's sort of how our stress response is designed to work. It's when those things happen constantly or really consistently, or for a prolonged period of time, that's when we start to see these negative issues pop up. So poor health, poor well-being, less productivity, less performance, those kind of things. Okay. Another issue with Zoom is that you cannot see people's faces, so it's really hard to make sure we're on the same page, but I'm assuming we're all fine. So I just want to move on now. You'll get really sick of definitions, but I just wanted to define now what we mean by stress in terms of workplace. So the workplace stress occurs when there's perceived job demands or efforts exceed the resources we have to cope. Sorry, I'm just getting a chat, so I just want to pull that up. Okay. So yeah, so they exceed our ability to cope, or they exceed the rewards that we feel like we're getting from our work. So if you work really hard, but you don't feel like you're supported or appreciated or rewarded, that is really what causes that stress response, the stress that we experience. So for example, if I'm doing 80 hours a week and I'm only getting paid $60,000 a year, and I really feel like that's unfair and that's not enough compensation for the time I'm putting in, that situation, because of the imbalance, is going to cause stress. Whereas another person might be working 80 hours a week and receiving what they feel is adequate pay. So they might not have a stress response, even though we're doing the same amount of hours. It has sort of differing effects on us, because when we're thinking about workplace stress, we really need to take into consideration the context of the employee. Not everyone develops workplace stress, and not everybody who experiences workplace stress has these really negative health outcomes. So understanding what things are happening for that person to protect them or maybe increase their risk is really important. Which leads me to the two models I'm going to talk about. So in the occupational stress literature, we have quite a few actually workplace stress models that we use to measure and conceptualize workplace stress. So the two I'm talking about today are the two that I used in my doctoral research. They're very widely used, and we know that they're a very good predictor of negative health outcomes and other sort of work performance and productivity outcomes. So the first one is the effort reward imbalance model. And it's really designed on that transactional nature of the relationship of work, like we were talking about just before. So it suggests that if we're experiencing really high effort and really low reward, that's when workplace stress will occur. And then that effort reward imbalance can predict negative health outcomes down the track. So in this model, effort's really defined as the demands and obligations that you have of work. So it can be things like your workload, whether you're doing lots of overtime or you have just time pressure on you, that kind of thing. And then rewards are really specifically defined as financial rewards. So again, how much you're getting paid for your work. Esteem, which really relates to, do you feel like you're getting recognition and appreciation from your colleagues and your supervisors? Do you have a good working relationship with them? And then also job security and career opportunities. So that relates to whether you feel like you're in a position to hold on to your job, or whether you think that you are going to get a promotion soon or can sort of move up the ladder. So often, if you're in an effort reward imbalance, most people leave their job, but some people will wait it out if they think that they've got a promotion coming up. So they'll put in more hours and that kind of thing to sort of get ahead in the game. The other section that I'll mention a couple of times throughout today is this intrinsic component of this model. So as I said before, not everybody responds to stress the same, and sometimes it could be these personal factors that are playing into that. So overcommitment is this sort of cognitive style that's characterized by poor coping. So people who are overcommitted tend to seek out control and also approval from those around them, and they also, like, the best way I can describe it is they just throw themselves into work when they should be taking a step back. So where they might be experiencing a high effort, low reward situation, instead of appraising that situation as being negative and that's something that they can't cope with, they feel like they can handle it and they throw themselves even more into work. So they'll work longer hours. They find it really difficult to switch off from work. They'll often like think about it at nighttime, and all of that stuff. So people who are experiencing workplace stress and are overcommitted tend to have the worst health outcomes when we are looking at workplace stress. So the next model I wanted to talk about is the job demands resources model, and this complements the ERI model really well, but it gives you some extra flexibility in terms of what is a demand and what is a resource. So it suggests that workplace factors can be characterized into demands or resources. So demands are things that require physical or psychological effort, and they tend to lead to, they're more likely to lead to burnout or workplace stress. And then of course from there, that's when we have our implications on health and productivity and well-being. So these can be things like role ambiguity, gosh, can't speak. So if you don't have a clear defined role, or you feel like you're being allocated tasks that are not a part of your role, that can be a demand on your time. It can be role conflict as well, is another one we see a lot in the literature. And this is where, again, you're getting different tasks from different people that conflict with one another, or again, it's just sort of outside of what you expected your role to be. And this can also relate to work roles and family roles conflicting, so that work and home life balance being out of whack. Again, it captures things like time pressures and workloads and daily hassles. So daily hassles are the little things that happen to us throughout the day that on their own aren't a big deal, but when you're getting hit with them over and over again, that's when it starts to become an issue. So it could be things like you've got terrible processes or things in place in your work that make it difficult for you to get your job done. It could just be little things like, now that we're all in technology, things crashing or being really slow, stuff like that. The resources component is broken up into two factors. So it can be job related or personal factors. And both of them are things that help you achieve your work goals. They help you reduce the demands of your work and also promote personal growth. So job resources tend to be things like social support, so your friendships and your relationships with your colleagues, having a good relationship with your manager or supervisor, or just getting good supervision from them, so like coaching and that kind of thing. Having appropriate working conditions, so job resources do include your office space. You know, if you're someone that used to work in an open planned office, that can sometimes be good, but it can also be bad depending on your occupation. So those kind of things need to be considered. Autonomy is another job resource. So how much flexibility and control do you have over your work tasks? And autonomy is going to come up a lot today. And then the personal resources are more dispositional characteristics. So this can be things like trait mindfulness, resilience, high self-efficacy and self-esteem, and it can be more pragmatic stuff like having good communication skills, knowing sort of your boundaries and when to say no to people and stuff like that. All those things that help you become more resistant to stress and also help you manage it better. So job resources and personal resources are thought to sort of activate this motivational process where people become more engaged in their work, and it's kind of related to overcommitment, but like the positive version. So people get experience flow and really good energy and really get involved and engaged in their work, but it's in a healthy, positive manner. There is suggested to be an interaction between these two things, so job demands and resources, where if job demands are really high but resources are very, very high, then we don't experience those negative outcomes like workplace stress. But if demands are high and job resources are low, that's when we see increased stress and stress responses and things like that. Okay, so this is probably not new, but I thought I'd just chuck it in on a slide so you can see that there is studies that back up what you may have experienced yourself or have heard from people before. So workplace stress is associated with poorer mental and physical health, poorer well-being in general. It's related to increased negative moods and emotions, increased tension and irritability, poorer decision-making, trouble concentrating, which of course from an employer's perspective, you don't want your workers to have. You want them to be able to make good decisions and be able to concentrate because they're going to be more productive and perform and have more higher quality work output as well. It is associated with increased absenteeism, so people tend to take more work off if they're feeling stressed out from it. Not to mention because of all the other things that impacts their health directly, so they might also be getting sick. It also increases levels of physiological indicators of stress and ill health. And I wanted to chuck this in just because it's what I study, but also I think it sort of really highlights how, you know, something like workplace stress, which is this psychosocial thing, impacts on our bodies to then develop ill health. And I'm sure you've all experienced when you've had a really few difficult months at work, maybe we're in the midst of it now, and when things start to calm down, you suddenly get a cold or the flu. This is because of these stress indicators. So things like cortisol have sort of maxed out and our body isn't able to sort of adapt to these kind of illnesses as readily, so it impacts our immune system. Okay, so working from home, this is all literature from pre-COVID, but it's still really relevant. So working from home, it's also known as telework. It's not a new thing. People have been doing it for ages, and there's been a massive, massive increase in the number of people who work from home in the last 10 to 15 years, assumably because of technological advances and stuff like that has been made it happen, I guess. So the research on this is really mixed. Some studies have found that it increases well-being and others have found that it increases workplace stress. So I imagine it probably depends on the individual a little bit, or maybe the work context as well. But I thought we'd just unpack some of the benefits, because obviously there are some, otherwise people wouldn't do it. So the first one is reduced commute. So commuting to work for a lot of people is stressful. This came out of some of my studies, and it's all in the literature as well. People find it really stressful and tiring to commute to and from work, particularly like I think if you're all from regional or Wodonga, the 20 minutes from Albury to Wodonga or vice versa isn't very hard, but we tend to travel outside of that. I know lots of people that live in Wodonga but work in Wangaratta, and you know, we're all sort of all over the place. So commuting can be quite detrimental. So some of the benefits also include increased productivity and motivation. This is because we have more control or autonomy in when we work and what we do at what times of the day. So you can sort of get into more of a flow of, okay, I'm a morning person, so I really work well when I'm in the morning, when I sit down with my first coffee. So I'm going to do all my hard stuff then, and then you get more productive because of that. The catch to this is that people who work from home tend to work longer hours, so their increased productivity might just be because they're working extra time than their office counterparts. Generally, there's less stress from co-workers and office politics. So I'm sure you've all worked in offices where the dynamic has been a little bit out. By working from home, you're obviously removed from some of that drama. It allows more flexibility to manage family and care responsibilities. That seems to be the main reason why people tend to work at home in the first place, because they want a better home-life balance, or they're parents and they need to try and manage those responsibilities together. So working from home gives them that space to do that. It results in higher morale or job satisfaction. Again, the asterisk is there because this is mixed. So some studies say yes, some studies say no. Some of the challenges that come out of working from home include a reduction in quality of communication among employees and management. So obviously we've got technology to communicate with one another, but it can definitely impact on how we do that. So right now I can't see anybody's faces, so I'm sort of talking to myself and I don't get that instant feedback. Whereas if I was in a room with you guys and I could see some confused looks, I know to go back over what I was talking about. So sometimes our communication isn't as effective when it's over things like Zoom, or even email, tone is missing, all of that sort of stuff. It has a reduction in creative idea generation among team members. So it can reduce creativity between team members. And the way I sort of thought about why this might be is I was sort of picturing, like, if you're in a room and you're brainstorming with your colleagues, you sort of have the freedom to speak whenever you want, and that's when sort of those rich creative ideas come out. Whereas when you're trying to do that in a virtual setting, you don't have that spontaneous thought that you just blurt out and then it leads to like good things. So I think that might be where this is coming from. The asterisk is there because I found another study that suggested that people who work from home are actually more creative than people who work in their office. There's a long-term relationship, the long-term relationship between the employee and the organization may be impacted. So because you're not physically at the workplace, you might not develop that same loyalty and connection to the organization itself. You might love your work, but then feel that you can do that work at a different organization. The spillover of work into home life and vice versa is very real. If you're working from home, lots of home life things can interrupt you, families, dogs, dishes. And then the same is true if you don't get all your work done and you're working into the night, then that's going to impact on your home life as well. And then people who work from home tend to overwork and also experience presenteeism. So overwork means that they put in more hours than they need to. It's really easy to be like, oh, I'll just finish up this, this report or these emails before I log off. And then it is to be like, oh, well, it takes me, 20 minutes to get home. I need to leave right this second to be able to get home in time for the kids and stuff like that. So people at home tend to work longer hours. Presenteeism is attending work when you're unwell, and I think we can all see why this happens. So, going to work when you're not feeling well is really detrimental. It doesn't help. Your work output's worse, and you're not as productive. So it's better to take those days off. The social isolation and lack of support can be a huge challenge for people. And then there's sometimes if you have inadequate equipment, if you don't have a proper ergonomical setup or you don't have a clear, defined office space, this can affect your psychological health, but also your physical health through other like back problems and stuff like that. Okay, so where does COVID-19 come into this? These are sort of the impacts COVID-19 has had, I think. So basically, obviously, we all know it's drastically impacted the way that we work. It's impacted how we interact as colleagues and how we interact with our family. And for many of us, it's resulted in a bigger workload than before. So I got told lots of you are from La Trobe, so we can vouch for this. Our workloads have like exploded. And for some of us, we've had increased caregiving responsibilities as well. So all of that, plus this huge change to online working, really under a very short time period, has amplified some of those challenges that we just discussed with working from home. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is that I think people aren't putting enough attention onto their emotional reactions to the pandemic itself. Sorry, not that they're not paying attention, but people aren't talking about it a lot. I've had a couple of conversations informally, so anecdotally, with students and other colleagues who just feel really drained and they feel exhausted and they're not really sure why. And I think it's because we're having all of these reactions to the pandemic that we're not consciously aware of. So a lot of people, 16 to 28% of participants in this review of some of the studies that have been done have reported symptoms of anxiety and depression. Another 8% reported increased stress in reaction to the pandemic. So we think about this in terms of workplace stress. Because we don't live in this little work bubble when we're at work, we need to consider what other things are stressing us, because that adds to our demand load. So if we think back to that what are they called? So the balance thingies, our demands are really heavy because we're sort of coping with all of this anxiety and some nastiness around the virus itself. And then of course, we've got all of the workload stuff anyway. And all of this can have an impact on our sleep, which then has this sort of impact on how we're feeling and how productive we are at work as well. So there's increased caring demands and work-home life negotiations. So for a lot of employees, when we moved online, schools also shut down. So parents were juggling homeschooling while working simultaneously. Even when the kids went back to school, or if you didn't have any kids, you probably found that you were negotiating with your work-home life quite a bit. So what I mean by that is you sort of had to work out, okay, what space am I going to use? Do I have to share this space with my partner? Are they also working from home? How is this going to impact on our ability to get our work done? There's a bunch of distractions that can happen in this space, and you need to sort of manage them. And by managing them, that can create some tensions. So having unsuitable or shared office spaces within the home, or just having dirty dishes around, or you might want to just hang out the washing quickly. All of those things can result in distractions and interruptions to your work, and that can definitely impact your productivity as well. So the move to working in an online environment obviously is a huge change for many of us. Heaps of us love going to the office and never thought about working from home. So having this big thing thrown at us has been a massive change. And humans in general just don't really like change. We like routine habits. So when things are thrown at us, we don't cope all that well. Change in the work environment in particular can generate a lot of uncertainty and fear about future directions for the organization. It can put some doubt around the employee as well. So what's their role in this new organization going to look like? Is this how we're going to work forever? I think there's this sense of unknown about whether, employers are going to be like, this saves us money, let's always work online, which can create a lot of uncertainty as well. COVID-19 has created a lot of job insecurity in organizations or workforces that previously probably weren't as threatened with it. So I think hearing on the news how many people are losing their jobs and having family and friends that has created this extra tension as well. And all of that can lead to poorer mental health, increased stress, less favorable organizational attitudes and attitudes towards change. So we're coping with the change less, and then decreased performance as well. The next one is lack of autonomy. So I told you this word would come back. Autonomy is super helpful in terms of a resource for us. We like to have control over how we sort of structure our day. Where this change in working from home is different to someone that has chosen to work from home is that it was forced upon us by the government regulations. So it's potentially removed a lot of the autonomy and flexibility from some workers, and this lack of autonomy within that process may lead people to perceive this as a threat or a hindrance rather than a challenge. So if you've set up, you've talked to your family, you've decided that working from home is the best thing for you and your family, having made that decision, you may approach it with more of a challenge perception because you're ready for it, you decided on it, you know that you've got the coping skills to do it, you've put in strategies already to set you up for success. So it's just a challenge, it's an exciting new adventure. Whereas when it's thrown upon you, like it was us, it can create this sense of threat or hindrance to the way that we work. And then of course it leads to those negative emotional reactions. We have a reduction in our typical coping strategies as well, which I think we need to consider. So many of us, when we're working in the office and our lives were, semi-normal, we had probably pretty good strategies already to cope with some of the day-to-day stresses. So going to the gym and having these physical outlets were really important for a lot of people. We know that physical activity is linked to mental health benefits. So when gyms and sporting events and things like sporting stuff closed, a lot of people lost their usual coping strategy. We've had fewer opportunities to informally debrief with colleagues, which I don't think I can understate how important they are. I think we see them as sort of these trivial things that just happen and interrupt our day to day, but I think they're so important. And again, my focus group studies pulled this out, that when we are having a bad day at work and we run into one of our colleagues in the hallway and you get to chat, you get to debrief on what's happening and resolve some of that stress straight away. Whereas if you had that same stressful experience at home, particularly if you're working alone at home, you've got no one to debrief with, you've got no one to talk it out with, so you're more likely to sit there and ruminate about it. So every time we sort of think up that moment, you're like, oh, I should have said this, or I wish they didn't speak to me like that. Every time you're doing that, you're reactivating that stress response, which again, we know from before isn't a good thing, because that's when we start to see those health issues. There's also, of course, restrictions around catching up with friends and family. So I don't know about you guys, but I really like having a wine on the weekend with my friends or my family. It was a lovely pastime to relax and just let the weight of the week wear off. So not having those kind of catch-ups and sort of things and gatherings can really impact us as well. We love being around our friends and family and having physical contact with people, so don't underestimate how some of these things being missing in our life can have quite a big impact on us. Okay, so I do want to talk about Zoom fatigue. I'm going to just make the assumption that nearly everybody here has experienced Zoom fatigue. One student called it Zoom purgatory because she was in classes all day long. So Zoom fatigue is the tiredness, anxiety, or worry that we are getting from overusing virtual video conferencing platforms, so Zoom in particular, but any of them. So you might be wondering, I've heard this from so many colleagues, they're like, I'm just so exhausted every time I get off a Zoom meeting. I don't know why. Here is some suggestions as to why. So the first one is it requires way more focus and energy than face-to-face communication does. So this is really for two reasons. One, even though communicating over Zoom feels as though everything is happening in real time, it feels like there's not really much of a delay between what you say and the person's reaction and things like that. There actually is quite a bit of a delay, even in its milliseconds, which can disrupt the synchrony between the two people having the conversation. And when this synchrony is disrupted, it means that our brains start to subconsciously work harder to bring that back. So it means that we focus in on visual cues, and things like that, and tone of voice to overcome that disruption. So we're using a lot more energy just because our usual very finely tuned and adaptive way of communicating is interrupted because we don't get those same cues. So related to that, I guess, is we work a lot harder to process these non-verbal cues. So when you're talking to someone in person, and this is fun to do if you haven't done it before, is when you're with your friend, sort of just change your position, the way you're sitting, or like fold your arms and see if they do it as well. Typically we do we mirror the people that we're having conversations with. So we pull the same sort of faces. If they're leaning forward, we'll lean forward. And it's sort of this nice bonding experience where we're both interacting. So we use all of these things. We use things like facial expressions, tone of voice, but also gestures and body language to help understand what the person is saying to us and how they're saying it to us, and all of these, non-verbal cues and things like that happen. On Zoom, we typically only see the person's face. I know I'm using heaps of gestures. I don't know whether you can see all of them, but yeah, we only see the person's face typically. So we're losing a lot of information that we would usually gain. So because of this, we tend to really focus on what they're doing, how they're saying things, and their facial expressions, which is exhausting. Okay, the next one is that Zoom tends to have increased distractions. So, people might have stuff going on in the background, dogs walking in and out, kids walking in and out, and the chat as well can be super distracting. So splitting our attention like that can be sort of detrimental to how we process the information in the meeting. There's also fewer visual breaks. So typically, again, on a Zoom call, you might have a slide like this, but often if you're just in a meeting with your colleagues, lots of people do the Brady Bunch, that's Zoom's new thing, the Brady Bunch sort of screen, so you can see everybody on the screen and you're just staring at faces. And what happens is we don't get the natural visual breaks that we usually do when we're talking to someone face to face. It's very rare that you would have a conversation with someone and maintain eye contact or look at them for the entire time. We typically shift our gaze. So we'll look at our feet, we'll look at different parts of their face, and we sort of come back in and out of making eye contact. On Zoom, we focus very heavily on the screen. So we're not getting any of that sort of natural disruption that helps us refocus our attention. So when we look away from a person, when we're talking to them and then look back, it helps us refocus in on what they're saying, and that's sort of missing from Zoom. Okay, the fourth one is the awkward silence. So my students gave me feedback about this last semester. Apparently I was leaving, I would ask them a question and wait for them to answer, and apparently I left it for too long. There was too many awkward silences. So tips for any teachers out there. But silence is a really normal part of our conversations. In everyday conversations, we often have silent, breaks of sound, and we just sit in silence for a little bit. On Zoom, though, these can be really uncomfortable. They're much more uncomfortable than what they are in person. So I'm not really sure why. I feel like there's a pressure to fill the space a little bit more, maybe because people are looking at us more intently because it's on the screen, but we feel like this added pressure. And then and we're also worrying that there's a technological issue. So when you're on Zoom and it all goes quiet, no one's saying anything, you immediately think that your Zoom's crashed or your headphones aren't working. So you start to have those little inside panics. Okay, I need to fix this. So it just adds all of this extra tension and pressure that we wouldn't usually get in a normal conversation with someone. The next part is about social evaluation. So even when we try not to, we subconsciously look at ourselves when we're on Zoom. So because we can see our own camera, we focus in on our face and tend to watch ourselves more than anybody else. And what this does is, it's sort of like a natural thing humans do. I think it's called the spotlight effect. We think people are paying much more attention to us than they actually are. It's particularly true for teenagers. Anyway, when you're on a Zoom meeting, because you're looking at yourself and you're starting to monitor how you present yourself. So, oh, do I really put my eyebrows up like that? Do I really look like that? Oh, I'm making a weird face. Because you're doing all of that, you're assuming that you're getting more social judgment than what you probably are. But it means that we tend to monitor our behavior and how we look much more heavily. And that kind of monitoring can be very, very draining. And we also know that social evaluation in particular is quite threatening to us and causes a pretty strong stress reaction. That's why we always get people to do public speaking when we're doing stress tests and stuff like that, because it makes them feel like they're going to be evaluated. The last one was new to me, actually. I hadn't heard of this before, but it kind of makes sense when you think about it. So it's a sense of intimidation. So this is particularly unnerving when you have, again, lots of people on your screen. So if you were all here in a Brady Bunch thing. So having a person's enlarged face in your space can be quite confronting. Even when we're not thinking about it, our brains register it as threatening. So even though we know that we're safe, subconsciously seeing, you know, big faces on our screens that are maintaining eye contact with us, we can register that as intimidating, and that's when we start to see an influx in our stress hormones again. So how do we manage Zoom fatigue? I think this is a nice transition into getting into like how to cope with stress more generally, but some tips to manage Zoom fatigue. Obviously, this is a very new area. It's a new phenomenon. So these are just some ideas people have had. I don't know how much empirical evidence there is to back it up, but try them out and see if they work for you. The first one is to control your physical space. And I don't mean in terms of your office. I mean in terms of your Zoom settings. So you can using breakout rooms can help, because you're actually focusing then on a fewer number of people, or setting up your settings so that you've only got the speaker showing and none of the other participants can be helpful too, because that way you're not looking at a dozen faces, you're just focusing on the one, which can relieve some of that pressure. Avoid multitasking. It's really, really tempting on Zoom to go through emails and like click on Google and stuff and get distracted on Facebook. So trying to avoid that is really important. We're terrible at multitasking as humans, and it has a really big impact on our performance. So studies show that people who multitask actually remember less information from the meeting, and they also are much less productive. So close everything before you jump on. Treat it like a normal meeting. You wouldn't have your phone out in one of those. Build in breaks. So I think we all made the rookie error of having back-to-back Zoom meetings when this first all happened. No, I did. I was like teaching for an hour and then I had a few meetings all in a row. Not being able to break is a really big issue. So in the before times, before COVID, we used to walk from meeting to meeting, and that little walk, even if it wasn't very far, was enough to sort of let your brain decompress from one meeting and get ready for the next one. We also sort of had this maybe not spoken, but this rule that meetings always started at 5 past the hour, that sort of disappeared when we moved on to Zoom meetings, and everyone got much more punctual. But it means that for some people, they're not getting a break at all for hours and hours and hours. So try and set up your meetings so that they start at 5 past the hour, maybe even finish 5:02 if you can. Big chunks of time are good, like 20 minutes, half an hour, so that you can get up and stretch and walk away from your computer and just have a break from looking at it. The other way you can build in breaks if you can't sort of control the meeting times is actually actively look away from the screen. You don't need to be sitting there watching the person the whole time to hear them. So look away from the screen. Try not to look at other things like email, but try and break your focus even for a few minutes by looking away. Hide your self-view. If you're like me and you get distracted from looking at yourself, try and hide it. You can turn it off, turn your video off, but if you want to be seen from everybody else, so everybody else can see you, you can flick You can change who you can see in that little square. Make social meetings opt-in. So because we can't see our family and friends physically, and our colleagues as well, just to have those, you know, informal chats, we're tending to have more and more social gatherings on Zoom or Facebook and things like that. So make sure that you're making those meetings opt-in for people. Monitor yourself and how fatigued you're feeling. If you're feeling like you're getting drained from all your Zoom meetings, maybe skip a couple of the social ones to try and decompress. And then have really clear expectations. So having a facilitator in your meetings can be super helpful because they can help you ask questions and make sure everybody's having a turn. We get a little bit anxious when we're not sure sort of what our role is in the meeting. So, and you know, when people are talking over the top of each other, so having a person to sort of control some of that can be useful. And then of course the other option is just not to have a Zoom meeting at all. Think about whether what you need to discuss can be done over an email, or, you know, peppered in with some phone calls instead. Okay, so mindfulness as an intervention. So the term mindfulness refers to the ability to purposely bring attention to the present moment. So it's about really creating awareness of your current internal and external experiences. And it's about not having judgment of these experiences, whether they're negative, positive, or neutral. You want to sort of observe them with a sense of curiosity, maybe some kindness and open-heartedness. So the idea is not to attach too much to each thing that you experience. So the term mindfulness often gets used interchangeably to describe both the trait and also the meditation. So the trait is obviously being able to have this ability or this skill, while the mindfulness meditation is the practice of being mindful. So it's this idea of setting up practice in your day-to-day to increase your trait mindfulness, because the idea is you want to be more mindful throughout. So mindfulness has been, I guess it's been sometimes suggested that it's like this cure-all, and like there's heaps of positive effects from it, and there are, but I think we need to keep in mind too that it doesn't work for everybody. It's not suited for everybody, particularly if you're highly anxious. You might find that mindfulness is not for you. But I think it does have a lot of evidence at the moment. It's just increasing in terms of the benefits. So individuals who tend to be more mindful in their day-to-day lives are generally more optimistic. They have higher self-esteem. They've got more flexible and less automatic thoughts, which is really important in terms of reducing stress. They show better emotional and behavioural regulations. They can often have better decision-making, as well as increased productivity and work performance. People who are also higher in trait mindfulness tend to have better social relationships too. They tend to be more other-focused and less self-focused, so they're able to sort of foster those interpersonal relationships a little bit better. In terms of mindfulness-based meditation programs, so the actual intervention where people were, you know, never had practiced it and then started to, these have shown that they decrease workplace stress, they improve mental health and physical health, and also sleep. They reduce feelings of worry. They can result in increased energy and concentration, and therefore productivity. They are also not just subjective. So I know that was a lot of, you know, the person's reporting on how they're feeling, so it could be a little bit biased. But we're actually starting to do more studies now that are looking at objective measures. So mindfulness meditation training has also been shown to increase immunity, reduce some of those stress hormones like cortisol that I've been talking about. And it's also been shown to like create changes in the brain. So it creates more connections between certain parts of the brain, so you can do better problem solving and decision making and stuff like that. So yeah, it can be measured objectively. It's not just something that happens. Okay, so how to implement mindfulness. So you can set aside some time to do formal meditation. So really sitting down, close your eyes, practice focusing on your breath or some other thing that you can focus on in the moment. Use guided meditations to help you if you're finding that you're getting very distracted. My guided meditations can really help you bring back your attention. Even short meditations have been shown to be beneficial. So this is a new area of research, but little sessions like 5 to 30 minutes or even just one-off sessions have benefits of their own. And you want to build on your practice if you can. So start off with those shorter sessions and then see if you can get up to 30, 45 minutes, an hour. You can also just practice informal mindfulness. So if sitting down and meditating isn't really a thing, that's cool. You can bring it into your daily routine by focusing your full attention on whatever you're doing in the present moment. So this can be things like doing the dishes, eating, going for a walk, or even just doing your work. So trying really hard to focus on what piece of work you're actually doing, and being mindful, I guess, or paying attention to when you get distracted. You will get distracted. So it's about practicing getting your focus back on what you were doing. So gently refocusing. Okay, some other formal interventions. So we've got, ideally, like we were talking about with our models, we could reduce the demands and efforts that we have. So if your workload is really high and that's what's causing you stress, chat to your manager and see if there's parts of your workload that can be reallocated or reduced in some way, and or try and increase the rewards and available resources that you have. So usually these structural changes are really difficult to actually implement, but if your manager's open to it, maybe have a chat with them to see what they can do. Another really good effective one is cognitive behavioural therapy, and this is about understanding how we think and behave, what triggers our stress and triggers our negative thoughts, so that we can adjust them. So we start to learn different coping strategies, different ways of thinking, and by doing that, we are reducing our stress level. CBT can be offered online. You can do it like as a self-guided thing, but you can also obviously see a healthcare professional as well. Acceptance and commitment therapy. This one's based on CBT and mindfulness, but also some other principles. It's really been designed to develop psychological flexibility, which is associated with good things. So some of the core things are about cognitive diffusion, which is learning methods to reduce the tendency to perceive thoughts, images and emotions as these like concrete things. Our brain is designed to think, and sometimes it just makes up stuff. So, you know, we don't always need to attach this sort of certainty or this realness to what we experience. And cognitive diffusion helps you learn to take a step back and away from that. Obviously, acceptance is in there. So really similar to mindfulness, just letting your thoughts come and go without really struggling and interacting with them. Contact with the present moment, so staying aware of what you're doing in the now, being open to that kind of experience. Observing yourself, so having an understanding of your sense of self is a big important principle within this one. And discovering what you value. So you want to make sure that you're, you know what's important to you, and you're not wasting energy, I suppose, on things that aren't. And then really, I guess what changes ACT compared to mindfulness is that it's about committed action. So you want to make sure that you're setting goals according to your values and actually doing them. Then we've got relaxation techniques. There's a bunch, but two that I know a bit about, progressive muscle relaxation. So this is where you sort of work through your body and tense each individual muscle as you work up. So you might start at your feet and tense them and then relax them. The idea behind it is that it teaches you what extra tension in your body feels like, so that you can more easily identify it. So, you know, if you're feeling really tight in your shoulders, you sort of know that, so you can start to relax, and that can help with your perceptions of stress. The other one is just diaphragmatic breathing. So we tend to breathe quite take shallow breaths, where we're breathing through our throat and our chest, and it can strain our neck as well. So training yourself to take big deep breaths into your diaphragm, making your belly nice and big like a baby would, can be really helpful in reducing your stress levels. Because not only does our stress response make us hyperventilate or breathe faster, controlling your breath and slowing it down can actually signal to your brain that your stress response is over and that you don't need to be stressed out anymore, like everything's okay. And then finally, most employees have employee assistance programs. So they really give you the opportunity to work through some of your personal issues around workplace stress in particular. They can help you come up with a more individualized strategy for you. So that's something to look at. You'll see that the common theme here for CBT, mindfulness and ACT is about the changing the perception. So as I said, reducing your demands, your workloads, or increasing your actual rewards and resources, and changing the work environment can be very, very difficult and isn't always feasible. So using these strategies that help shift your perception of them can be really useful. The human brain's sort of wired to focus on negative things. So we tend to, I can see how we can focus in on our very high efforts and demands, and not see or experience the rewards and resources as readily. So by taking a more neutral approach to how we perceive things in our day-to-day and focusing on the present moment, we actually experience those rewards and resources more readily and more richly, so that can lead to why these kind of things can be useful. The other part of it is these increase our personal resources. So mindfulness, CBT, ACT, they all help improve resilience, optimism, and self-efficacy, and all of those things help us cope with stress in general. So it's really useful. Okay, so some quick stress reducing tactics. We're nearly at the end, guys. So I just sort of, these just all came from my brain. They've obviously got evidence attached to them, but I'm sure there's a lot more. So the first one is spending time with your pets. I have dogs, and this has been the best part about working from home, is that I can spend more time with them. But we know from research that spending time patting your dogs and like interacting with them, or any animal, even fish, can have a really big impact on your well-being and reduce your stress. Practice self-care. Find some self-care strategies that might help you sort of unwind from the day, that can trigger your relaxation. So it can be like reading a book, talking to someone on the phone, having a long bath, having a sip of wine, I don't know, anything that you think will that is helpful for you. Having a regular self-care routine is really important. Getting out into nature. So we know that even just seeing trees and having pictures of landscapes can improve mood and well-being and reduce stress. But even better, if you can spend some time away from the computer, out in the sun, or go for a quick walk, that can have a huge impact pretty immediately on your state of mind. Set some boundaries and clear physical distinctions between your work and home life. So if you can, have a separate room in your house for working. If you can't do that, try and practice some habits or routines that you can use that signal to you that it's the end of the workday. So whether it's like, I don't know, you flick off a particular lamp, or like you closing your laptop and putting it on a certain place, signals to you that the workday is over. That can help you stop being so overcommitted and ruminating on your work life. And then finally, you can start practicing gratitude. So thinking about things that we're grateful for, or just the positive things, it's sort of what I was saying before, brings our attention to the positive, and can be really, really beneficial. So it's still quite limited in terms of workplace stress, like with the research on whether it's effective or not, but it has been linked to more positive emotions, less stress, and fewer health complaints as well. So the ways that you can start doing it is simply just writing down 3 things that you're grateful for the day. It can be work related or stuff from your personal life as well. You can thank someone else, so sending someone an email to tell them they've been doing a great job, or you found this really helpful, can be useful. It not only helps them, it'll, you know, really make their day as well, but it also increases your mood by paying it forward. You can try to find things that you're grateful for in a difficult situation. So, you know, if you're in a very heated debate with your colleagues in a Zoom meeting, rather than, you know, getting frustrated that they have a different opinion than you, maybe being grateful that they do, because it opens up more opportunities and it gives you a broader range of thinking and finding sort of the positives out of the negative. Okay, so I've just chopped here some resources, and my extra reading is just 1 book, but I just thought I would throw them out here. If you want to get into mindfulness meditation, there is copious amounts of apps and websites and things like that. There's a lot of free ones. Smiling Mind, Headspace, and the Calm app are all really good. Smiling Mind is completely free. That means like you never have to sign up or pay a subscription, but Headspace and Calm, I think, have free meditations, and then if you want more, you have to go into like a subscription. Some of the cognitive behavioural therapies I have less experience with, but I found one called Happify and Pacifica. And then This Way Up is another one. It's called it's got a coping with stress course, and actually is like an online course that you can complete for free. The ACT stuff, I couldn't find a particular app that did it. I'm sure there is one, but there's heaps again on, if you Google it, that'll come up with heaps of information for you. And then a really, really nice book, if you want to start reading, is The Resilience Project. It really captures some of the stuff that we talked about today. It's not specific to workplace stress, but really how to be resilient in our everyday life. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening and joining me. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, or I think the Q&A section as well. Well, thank you, Jody. Yeah, I figured a lot of this stuff is things that you'll be familiar with, but sometimes you just need to hear another person say them for you to be like, yeah, I can take the time to go for a walk if I'm feeling stressed. Thanks, everyone. I'm really glad that it was helpful for so many of you. I definitely agree, Helen. I think a lot of us are feeling quite exhausted, so yeah, absolutely, Jody. It's really hard when there isn't sort of these rules. I find too, one of my colleagues, his internet is a little bit sketchy, so I have to pause even longer before to allow him to react to what I've said. And it's really, really draining when you've got those sort of disruptions or people aren't following the rules that you used to and the courtesies that you've developed in your other meetings. Okay, I do have one question. Kate has asked what sort of support is there for smaller private organisations who aren't linked in with an EAP program with stressed employees? So I think some of these ones that I've suggested, because they've got online components to them, there's something that you can offer to your employees. So in one of my studies, we gave them a workplace stress intervention. So it was a mindfulness intervention, and we just linked them into a resource that's already available to them freely online, but help them sort of set it up. So doing something like that might be helpful. It was sort of an opt-in thing, and we didn't make everybody do it. But I think using the resources that are available can be really useful. Thinking about ways that you might be able to increase their resources within your own can be helpful as well. Like, is there a time where you can increase flexibility so they don't feel, or a way you can increase flexibility so they don't feel guilty if they've taken the morning off to deal with a sick kid or that kind of thing? Just changing some of those structures can go a long way. I hope that helps. I also know that some places around Albury-Wodonga, like there's a couple of companies that are linked in with like physiotherapists and massage therapists and that kind of thing, so that their employees get a discounted rate when they go and use them. So that kind of stuff could also be an option. Yeah, Tammy, I think Gateway Health would be somewhere people could go if they don't have an EAP. There's lots as well, even things like Beyond Blue and what's the other one, Headspace as well. They have heaps of online and free resources available. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, they're not, although they're like connected with depression, and most people think of depression when they hear Beyond Blue, they actually have a really good range of resources as well. Thanks, Kate. Okay, I think we're past our time now, so I might sign off if that's okay. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys. I hope it's a good one.